Welcome to Dialogues for Change. Life is not a void to be filled. It is a plenitude to be discovered. Today, I would like to share with you some thoughts by Arthur Koestler from his book The Yogi and the Commissar, which is a bit about the question of how to organize our living together between these two poles of our internal transformation and of the external transformation. So I think his thoughts are quite inspiring and make us think. I like to imagine an instrument which would enable us to break up patterns of social behavior as the physicist breaks up a beam of rays. Looking through the sociological spectroscope, we would see spread out under the diffraction grating the rainbow-colored spectrum of all possible human attitudes to life. The whole distressing muddle would become neat, clear, and comprehensive. On one end of the spectrum, obviously on the infrared end, we would see the Commissar. The Commissar believes in change from without. He believes that all the best of humanity, including constipation and the Oedipus complex, can and will be cured by revolution. That is, by a radical reorganization of the system of production and distribution of goods. That this end justifies the use of all means, including violence, ruse, treachery, and poison. That logical reasoning is an unfailing compass and the universe a kind of very large clockwork, in which a very large number of electrons, once set into motion, will forever revolve in their predictable orbits, and that whosoever believes in anything else is an escapist. This end of the spectrum has the lowest frequency of vibrations and is, in a way, the coarsest component of the beam, but it conveys the maximum amount of heat. On the other end of the spectrum, where the waves become so short and of such high frequency that the eye no longer sees them, colorless, warmthless, but all-penetrating, crouches the Yogi, melting away in the ultraviolet. He has no objection to calling the universe a clockwork, but he thinks that it could be called, with about the same amount of truth, a musical box or a fish pond. He believes that the end is unpredictable and that the means alone count. He rejects violence under any circumstances. He believes that logical reasoning gradually loses its compass value as the mind approaches the magnetic pole of truth, or the absolute, which alone matters. He believes that nothing can be improved by exterior organization and everything by the individual effort from within, and that whosoever believes in anything else is an escapist. He believes that the debt servitude imposed upon the peasants of India by the moneylenders should not be abolished by financial legislation, but by spiritual means. He believes that each individual is alone but attached to the all-one by an invisible umbilical cord, that his creative forces, his goodness, trueness, and usefulness can alone be nourished by the sap which reaches him through this cord, and that his only task during his earthly life is to avoid any action, emotion, or thought which might lead to a breaking of the cord. This avoidance has to be maintained by difficult, elaborate technique, the only kind of technique which he accepts. Between these two extremes are spread out in a continuous sequence the spectral lines of the more sedate human attitudes. The more we approach its center, the more does the spectrum become blurred and woolly. On the other hand, this increase of wool on the naked spectral bodies makes them look more decent and intercourse with them more civilized. You cannot argue with a naked Commissar. He starts at once to beat his chest and next he strangles you whether you be friend or foe in his deadly embrace. You cannot argue with the ultraviolet skeleton either, because words mean nothing to him. You can argue with post-war planners, Fabians, Quakers, liberals, and philanthropists. But the argument will lead nowhere, for the real issue remains between the Yogi and the Commissar, between the fundamental conceptions of change from without and change from within. It is easy to say that all that is wanted is a synthesis between saint and revolutionary, But so far, this has never been achieved. What has been achieved are various motley forms of compromise, the blurred intermediary bands of the spectrum, compromise, but not synthesis. Apparently the two elements do not mix, and this may be one of the reasons why we have made such a mess of our history. The Commissar's emotional energies are fixed on the relation between individual and society, the Yogis on the relation between the individual and the universe. Again, it is easy to say that all that is wanted is a little mutual effort. One might as well ask a homosexual to make a little effort towards the opposite sex, and vice versa. The Commissar's dilemma. All attempts to change the nature of man by Commissar methods have so far failed. From Spartacus' Sun State to Inquisition and Reformation to Soviet Russia. This failure seems to be rooted in two disturbing phenomena which Kant could have called the antinomies of applied reasoning. The first is the antinomy of the serpentine, the second, the antinomy of the slopes. The peak of utopia is steep. The serpentine road which leads up to it has many tortuous curves. While you are moving up the road, you never face the peak. Your direction is the tangent, leading nowhere. If a great mass of people are pushing forward along the serpentine, they will, according to the fatal laws of inertia, push their leader off the road and then follow him, the whole movement flying off at the tangent into the nowhere. That is what happened to most revolutionary movements, where the mass impulse is strong and the inertia of the mass is converted into a violent centrifugal force. In the more cautious reformist movements, on the other hand, the momentum soon fades out, and the ascending spiral first becomes a weary circling round and round the peak without gaining in height, until it finally degenerates into a descending spiral. For example, the trade unionist movement. The second rule of failure is the antinomy of the slopes, or of ends and means. Either the means are subordinated to the end, or vice versa. Theoretically, you may build up elaborate liberal or religious halfway houses, but if burdened with responsibility and confronted with a practical decision to be taken, you have to choose one way or the other. Once you have chosen, you are on the slope. If you have chosen to subordinate the means to the end, the slope makes you slide down deeper and deeper on a moving carpet of common sense propositions. For instance, the right of self-defense, the best defense is attack, increase of ruthlessness shortens the struggle, etc. Another well-known slope pattern starts with the healer's knife and ends with the Moscow purges. The fatal mechanism of this slope was already known to Pascal. Man is neither angel nor brute, and his misery is that Man is neither angel nor brute, and his misery is that he who would act the angel acts the brute. Now the yogi's dilemma. The attempts to produce change from within on a mass scale were equally unsuccessful. Whenever an attempt was made to organize saintliness by exterior means, the organizers were caught in the same dilemmas. The Inquisition flew off at a tangent. The churches in the liberal era circle around and round the peak without gaining height. The subordinate, the end, to the mean leads to a slope as fatal as the inverse one. Gandhi's slope started with non-violence and made him gradually slide down his present position of non-resistance to Japanese conquest. The Japanese might kill a few million Indians, but someday they would get tired of it, and thus the moral integrity of India would be saved. Obviously, the prospects for the masses of common people are not brighter under this inverted Machiavellianism than under the leadership of the Commissars. One slope leads to the Inquisition and the purges, the other to passive submission, to bayoneting and raping, to villages without sewage, septic childbeds and trachoma. The Yogi and the Commissar may call it quits. But they don't. Unable to form a synthesis and unsatisfied by the patched-up compromises in the medium bands of the spectrum, they attract and repel each other in rhythmical intervals. This strange minuet is one of the more exciting aspects of history, which Marxism, otherwise the most serviceable guide, falls short of explaining. Under certain historic climates, mass migrations start from one end of the spectrum to the other, general displacements from infrared to ultraviolet, or vice versa. like mighty trade winds traveling over the seas. The 19th century brought such a general displacement towards the Commissar or infrared end. The present climate favors the opposite direction. Since the early 30s, we are all traveling more or less consciously, more or less willingly, towards the ultraviolet end. The less consciously we drift with the wind, the more willingly we do it. The more consciously, the less willingly. Personally, I belong to the latter type. I wish one could still write an honest infrared novel without an ultraviolet ending. But one can't. Just as no honest scientist can now publish a book on physics without a metaphysical epilogue, no honest socialist can write a survey of the left's defeats without accounting for the irrational factor in mass psychology. He who clings blindly to the past will be left behind, but he who abandons himself too readily will be carried away like a dry leaf. All one can do is to travel even more consciously and even less willingly. Well, I don't know if we necessarily have to travel less willingly, but I think that these thoughts developed by Arthur Koestler in this book, Between the Yogi and the Commissar, are really very, very challenging things to think about in the contemporary society. We really have to find a balance of being responsible not only towards ourselves and opening up to ourselves, but also to open up to our environment, to be responsible always towards our environment, to the others and beyond. So I hope that these thoughts and inspirations have inspired you on this Sunday, 2nd of March 2014. Thank you.